Have you ever faced a moment in life when everything seemed to be falling apart? When fear, uncertainty, and challenges seemed overwhelming, and you wondered where to turn for peace, guidance, and strength? Psalm 27 offers a powerful answer to that question. It's more than just a passage of Scripture. It's a declaration of unshakable confidence in God's ability to protect, guide, and sustain us through any trial. In the midst of life's storms, Psalm 27 provides a roadmap for how we can face adversity with courage, knowing that God is our light, our refuge, and our strength. From seeking God's face in prayer to trusting in His protection when the world feels uncertain, this psalm offers timeless wisdom that speaks directly to our hearts. Whether you're facing personal battles, external challenges, or simply navigating the ups and downs of life, Psalm 27 encourages us to find peace in God's presence, strength in His protection, and unwavering confidence in His guidance. Today, let's explore how these words can change our perspective, deepen our relationship with God, and empower us to face any obstacle with faith and courage. Psalm 27 begins with one of the most powerful declarations in the Bible. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? This verse serves as a profound reminder of God's ultimate role as both our protector and our guide. It is a declaration of trust and confidence in God's ability to shield us from harm, regardless of the circumstances. The psalmist David speaks with unwavering assurance, proclaiming that God is not just a distant deity, but a personal protector in times of danger and fear. The imagery of God as light is significant, especially when we consider the symbolic meaning of light in the Bible. Light is often associated with purity, truth, and guidance. It represents God's presence, dispelling the darkness of uncertainty, fear, and confusion. When the psalmist says, "The Lord is my light," he is not only expressing that God brings illumination into the darkness of life's challenges, but also that God is the source of spiritual clarity in times of personal or external darkness. Whether that be in the form of emotional struggles, crises of faith, or even physical threats, God's light shines brightly, showing us the way forward. This understanding can transform how we face difficult situations. Instead of succumbing to fear, we can rest in the assurance that God is providing us with His light, leading us through whatever we face. In the same verse, the psalmist also calls God His salvation. Salvation in this context encompasses both physical and spiritual deliverance. When faced with danger or oppression, whether literal or metaphorical, God is the one who rescues us from destruction. The word salvation here signifies not only a future hope, but a present reality. It is the assurance that God is actively working on our behalf, guarding us from harm and providing the security that we need in our daily lives. Whom shall I fear? The psalmist answers this rhetorical question with confidence, expressing that there is no fear that can hold sway over a heart anchored in the protection of God. This line reflects a deep sense of trust in God's sovereign power. When we acknowledge that the Lord is our light and salvation, it becomes nearly impossible to be overcome by fear, because we recognize that no external threat can separate us from His protective care. Whether we face personal fears, societal unrest, illness, or danger from external forces, the reminder of God's encompassing protection should bring us peace. The phrase, "Whom shall I fear?" also challenges us to consider the fears we harbor in our own lives. Fear often stems from a perceived lack of control or the unknown. Yet the psalmist teaches us that the fear of unknown circumstances diminishes when we trust in God's authority and protection. When God is our refuge, we no longer have to fear the chaos of life or the uncertainty of the future, because He is the constant, unshakable force in our life. His presence, like a shield, guards us not just physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. Ultimately, Psalm 27:1 invites believers to move beyond theoretical faith and live with the practical assurance that God is actively protecting us at every moment. As we place our trust in His provision and care, we are freed from the paralyzing grip of fear, empowered to face life's challenges with courage and unwavering faith. The Lord is not only our deliverer, but also our light in every dark corner of life. Psalm 27:5 states, "For in the day of trouble He will keep me safe in His dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of His tabernacle and set me high upon a rock." This verse introduces one of the most comforting themes in Scripture, the idea of God as our refuge. It speaks to the reality that in times of danger, adversity, and distress, God provides a safe place where we can find security and peace. The imagery of refuge and shelter in this passage is not only a metaphor for protection, but also an invitation to experience the tangible security that comes from dwelling in God's presence. The term refuge suggests a place of safety, a stronghold where we are shielded from harm. In the ancient world, cities with walls were often seen as places of refuge for those under attack. They were places where people could flee to find protection from their enemies. Similarly, God offers Himself as a refuge, a secure and unshakable place where we can run when life feels overwhelming or when fear tries to take hold. This is not a temporary refuge, but a place where we can rest, knowing that God's care for us is constant and unfailing. It's a place where we can find peace amidst chaos and clarity in the midst of confusion. The psalmist goes on to describe this refuge as his dwelling and the shelter of his tabernacle. These terms have deep roots in Israel's religious practices, where the tabernacle was the holy place, where God's presence dwelled among His people. The tabernacle was regarded as the ultimate sacred space, the place where one could encounter God. By referencing the tabernacle, the psalmist is highlighting the intimate and protective relationship that God desires to have with His people. It's not simply about physical protection, but spiritual intimacy and closeness. God's refuge is not a distant, cold fortress, but a place of warmth, comfort, and nearness where we can experience His loving presence in every season of life. The psalmist also emphasizes that God will set me high upon a rock. The rock symbolizes stability and strength. In ancient times, people would often seek refuge in high places, such as mountains or rocky hills, because these places were difficult for enemies to reach. To be placed upon a rock is to be lifted above danger and instability, offering a perspective of safety and protection. This powerful image illustrates how God places us in a position of security and victory above the threats and struggles that seek to overwhelm us. It is not just about physical safety, but also about being elevated spiritually, where we can see beyond our immediate troubles and recognize God's sovereignty over every situation. In moments of fear, doubt, or hardship, Psalm 27:5 reminds us to turn to God as our refuge. When life's storms rage and external forces try to pull us down, God offers us a safe and secure place in His presence. His protection is not limited to physical challenges, but extends to emotional and spiritual difficulties as well. By taking refuge in God, we are acknowledging His authority and trusting in His ability to shelter and sustain us in every circumstance. Through this refuge, we find a peace that transcends understanding and the strength to endure whatever trials we face. In Psalm 27:11, the psalmist says, "Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors." This plea for guidance reflects a deep trust in God's direction and a recognition that, in the midst of life's challenges, only God can provide the clear path forward. The verse conveys the psalmist's confidence in God's ability to lead, even when circumstances seem uncertain or overwhelming. It emphasizes the importance of divine guidance, which provides not only clarity in decision-making, but also assurance of walking in alignment with God's will. The phrase, "teach me your way," highlights the psalmist's humble submission to God's wisdom. It is a recognition that human understanding is limited and that true wisdom and direction come from God alone. In life, we often face crossroads, difficult choices, and moments where the next step is unclear. At times like these, we may rely on our own judgment, or we may seek advice from others. However, the psalmist's plea suggests that the best place to turn is to God, who sees the bigger picture and knows the way forward. God's wisdom is perfect and far beyond our own understanding. And when we seek His guidance, we are acknowledging that we need His insight more than anything else. The request to lead me in a straight path underscores the desire for clarity and a sense of direction in life. The straight path symbolizes a clear, upright, and righteous way, one that aligns with God's will and purpose. It suggests not just a physical journey, but a moral and spiritual one. In a world full of distractions, temptations, and obstacles, it is easy to veer off course. The psalmist's prayer reflects a desire to stay on the path that leads to God's blessings, peace, and ultimate purpose. This is a path of righteousness, where one's steps are guided by God's truth, His word, and His loving will. It is a reminder that even when life becomes complicated or when external pressures arise, God's guidance provides a steady course, offering us a sense of stability and peace. The line, "because of my oppressors," introduces the external challenges and struggles that the psalmist is facing. These oppressors represent forces of adversity, whether in the form of enemies, difficult circumstances, or personal trials. In the face of opposition, it can be easy to become overwhelmed or disoriented. The psalmist's appeal to God for guidance during these times shows the belief that God's direction is not only beneficial, but essential, especially when the weight of life's difficulties threatens to cloud our judgment. It speaks to the belief that God's leadership is particularly crucial when we face opposition and challenges, as His guidance provides a foundation for resilience and strength. This verse also highlights the psalmist's confidence that God is capable of leading him in the right direction. The psalmist is not simply asking for help, but expressing a deep trust in God's ability to provide the right path, one that is not only straight, but protected from the snares of the enemy. Confidence in God's guidance means that no matter how challenging life becomes, the believer can trust that God will show the way. Even when there is uncertainty, God's path is the one we can trust to lead us through the storm and into His promises. Ultimately, Psalm 27:11 serves as a reminder to continually seek God's guidance in our own lives, especially when faced with difficult decisions, unclear situations, or external pressures. It encourages us to lean on God's wisdom, knowing that He will guide us in a straight and righteous path, even when the way seems unclear. It is a call to trust that God's direction is always the best one, leading us toward a future filled with His peace, purpose, and presence. Psalm 27:4 expresses a deep and powerful longing for God's presence. "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple." This verse reveals the psalmist's singular focus on desiring a close and intimate relationship with God. It reflects a yearning for communion with the Creator that surpasses all other desires, and the psalmist makes it clear that nothing is more important than dwelling in the presence of God, experiencing His beauty, and seeking His guidance. The phrase, "one thing I ask from the Lord," signals a heartfelt plea for something very specific. In a world filled with distractions and competing desires, the psalmist's request is focused and unambiguous. The psalmist does not ask for wealth, fame, or personal success, but for one thing: God's presence. This emphasizes the value of a relationship with God over everything else. In the context of this verse, one thing becomes a symbol of the deep spiritual longing that transcends material needs or worldly desires. It is a recognition that in God's presence there is fulfillment and peace that surpasses anything else the world can offer. The psalmist seeks God's presence above all, underscoring how vital it is to have God at the center of one's life. The psalmist's request is not just about visiting the house of the Lord occasionally, but about dwelling there continually, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, conveys a desire for permanent communion with God. To dwell in God's house is to live in His presence, to make His presence the foundation of one's life. The imagery of dwelling suggests a deep and abiding connection with God, not just a fleeting encounter. It reflects the longing for a lifestyle marked by continuous interaction with God, where His presence permeates every moment and decision. The psalmist's yearning is not for occasional visits to God's temple, but for constant fellowship, an ongoing relationship that shapes every aspect of life. The desire to gaze on the beauty of the Lord further underscores the psalmist's longing. God's beauty here refers not only to His majesty and glory, but also to the goodness, love, and grace that define His character. To gaze upon God's beauty is to contemplate His nature, to reflect on His holiness, His love, and His eternal attributes. The psalmist is not simply seeking God's blessings, but seeking God Himself, desiring to know Him more deeply. This intimate gaze is an act of worship where the soul is captivated by the wonder of God's being. The beauty of the Lord is not a superficial or aesthetic quality, but a profound spiritual beauty that touches the heart and soul. This gaze represents a longing to experience God's presence in a way that transforms and fulfills. Finally, the psalmist desires to seek Him in His temple, which reflects a willingness to actively pursue God. Seeking God is not a passive act, but requires intentional effort and focus. In the temple, the psalmist could engage in worship, prayer, and meditation, actions that bring him closer to God's heart. The temple symbolizes a place where God's presence is especially felt, and seeking God within this space reflects the believer's pursuit of intimacy with the Creator. It is an expression of dedication, where the psalmist prioritizes God above all else and actively seeks to cultivate a relationship with Him through worship and devotion. The longing expressed in Psalm 27:4 is not a distant or abstract desire, but a passionate pursuit of a deeper connection with God. It calls believers to reflect on their own priorities and desires, challenging them to place God's presence at the center of their lives and to seek Him continually. Just as the psalmist yearned to dwell in God's presence, we are encouraged to seek and value God above all else, making Him the focus of our hearts and lives. In Psalm 27:3, the psalmist declares, "Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident." This verse offers a profound message of strength and courage in the face of adversity. Despite the threatening presence of enemies and overwhelming circumstances, the psalmist expresses unwavering confidence in God's protection and power. The imagery of besieging armies and war speaks to the most intense forms of external pressure and danger. Yet the psalmist's response is not one of fear or despair, but of faith and assurance. This verse captures a powerful example of how trusting in God can provide unshakable strength, even in the darkest of time. The phrase, "though an army besiege me," introduces the image of a hostile force, intent on surrounding and overwhelming the psalmist. In ancient times, a siege was one of the most terrifying and effective tactics used in warfare. Armies would encircle a city, cutting off its supplies and slowly wearing down the defenses. For those inside the besieged city, fear and hopelessness were natural responses, as they faced impending destruction. However, the psalmist does not respond with panic or anxiety. Instead, the declaration of faith begins with a bold statement, "My heart will not fear." This is not an act of denial or ignoring the reality of danger. Rather, it is an affirmation of trust in God's sovereignty and protection. The psalmist chooses to place his trust in God, acknowledging that no external threat can overcome the security that comes from a deep relationship with the Lord. In addition to the army, the psalmist also mentions, "Though war break out against me," war represents a more intense, large-scale conflict, one that brings destruction, loss, and chaos. The psalmist's reference to war highlights that not only are there smaller battles to face, but there may also be significant, life-altering challenges on the horizon. Yet in the face of such trials, the psalmist maintains his confidence. "Even then I will be confident," is a declaration of resilience, rooted in an unshakable trust in God. This shows that no matter how overwhelming or terrifying the situation may be, the psalmist's confidence is anchored in God's ability to protect and deliver. The psalmist's confidence does not come from his own strength, but from the belief that God is bigger than any army or war. This verse is not just about physical battles, but also speaks to the emotional and spiritual battles that every believer faces. Whether it is the internal struggles with fear, doubt, or anxiety, or the external pressures from people or circumstances, Psalm 27:3 encourages believers to find strength in God's presence. The psalmist's heart is steadfast, not because he is unaware of the challenges, but because he knows that God's power is greater than anything that may come against him. The psalmist chooses to fix his eyes on God's faithfulness rather than the circumstances at hand. The declaration of confidence in the face of adversity is a reminder for believers today that God is always present, even in our most difficult moments. When we feel surrounded by fear or when life's battles seem insurmountable, we are invited to trust in God's protection and power. Just as the psalmist found strength to stand firm, we too can rely on God to provide the courage and resilience needed to face any adversity. In the midst of challenges, God's strength becomes our refuge, and His presence becomes the foundation that keeps our hearts steady. Psalm 27:7-8 speaks to the psalmist's deep desire to connect with God through prayer, even in times of trouble. The verses read, "Hear my voice when I call, Lord, be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says of you, seek His face. Your face, Lord, I will seek." These verses captured the essence of a believer's personal relationship with God, particularly through prayer. The psalmist's call for God to hear my voice reflects a posture of urgent need and dependence. It is a reminder of the intimate, conversational nature of prayer, a dialogue between the believer and God. The desire for God's mercy and the commitment to seeking His face serve as powerful expressions of trust and surrender. The phrase, "Hear my voice when I call, Lord," illustrates the psalmist's understanding that God is always attentive to His people's cries. Prayer is not a one-way communication, but a relationship where God listens and responds. The psalmist recognizes that God's ear is always open to those who call upon Him. This recognition of God's attentiveness provides comfort to the believer, especially in times of distress. When we face moments of difficulty, knowing that God hears our voice brings reassurance. Prayer becomes not only a way of expressing our needs, but also a way of fostering intimacy with the Creator, who is always ready to listen. The psalmist's plea for God's mercy, "Be merciful to me and answer me," underscores a posture of humility and dependence. In times of hardship, it is easy to forget that we are utterly reliant on God's grace. The psalmist acknowledges that God's mercy is essential both for the healing of emotional wounds and for the resolution of external conflicts. The request for mercy is not only about asking for forgiveness, but also about seeking God's compassion and favor in the midst of life's trials. It is a recognition that no matter how great the challenge or how severe the consequences, God's mercy is always available to those who turn to Him with sincerity. My heart says of you, seek His face, reveals the psalmist's inner conviction and call to action. The desire to seek God's face is not a passive longing, but an active pursuit. The face of God symbolizes His presence, His essence, and His personal connection with His people. To seek God's face is to yearn for His closeness and intimacy. In ancient Jewish culture, to seek God's face was often considered a symbol of receiving God's blessing and favor. It signified a relationship marked by closeness, trust, and mutual understanding. The psalmist's heart directs him to seek God's face with purpose and intent, recognizing that it is in God's presence that true peace, clarity, and strength are found. The decision to seek God's face with such resolve, your face, Lord, I will seek, demonstrates a deep commitment to prioritize God above all else. This declaration reveals the psalmist's personal devotion, a commitment to pursue God even when circumstances may seem overwhelming. The act of seeking God's face is more than a mere request. It is a declaration of trust that God's presence is the source of all peace and guidance. It is a challenge for believers today to not only pray for help in times of need, but to actively seek God's presence as the primary source of strength and wisdom in all aspects of life. Ultimately, Psalm 27, 7 and 8 teaches believers that prayer is not just about asking for things, but about cultivating a relationship with God through sincere, heartfelt communication. It emphasizes the importance of seeking God's presence, not just for answers to specific problems, but for the deep satisfaction that comes from being in His presence. The psalmist's prayer reveals the power of persistent, intimate communication with God, a communication that strengthens faith and fosters a deeper connection with the Creator. Through prayer, we are reminded that God is always listening, ready to show mercy, and eager to reveal His face to those who seek Him. In conclusion, Psalm 27 provides us with a roadmap for navigating the challenges and uncertainties of life with unwavering faith and trust in God. From recognizing God as our light and salvation to finding refuge in His presence, these key themes remind us that no matter what trials we face, we can find strength, guidance, and peace in Him. Whether it's seeking His guidance, desiring His presence, or finding courage in adversity, Psalm 27 encourages us to draw closer to God, to seek Him in prayer, and to trust that He is always with us, ready to lead us through every storm. May these reflections serve as a reminder that no matter where life leads, we can face it with confidence, knowing that the Lord is our protector, guide, and refuge. Good luck on your journey of faith and growth, and thank you for taking the time to reflect on these powerful truths. May you always find peace and strength in the presence of the Lord.